Thank you. Wow. I mean, calm down, calm down. It's a pleasure to be here, and I lost the ability to memorize at some point, so I'm going to read from my iPad. I just am going to be that person. But when Tina mentioned that the theme for this month was soft, I started writing an essay, but I'm not going to read it for you. But it did make me think about my next book, which is a book of writing advice called How to Be Heard. I know. I'm so excited to finish it at some point. And so is my publisher. But I wrote a chapter about how to have a nemesis, because I think that when you're a creative person, you have an active imagination, and part of that imagination should be spent on pettiness. So I'm going to tell you all about my nemesis. In my essay, Bad Feminist, which I wrote much earlier in my career, I said I did not want to be put on a pedestal as a feminist or really as anything, because I understood even then that when you are put on a pedestal, you are frozen in place and time. You're not allowed to move, to grow, to fail. People see you as who you were or who they want you to be when they put you on that pedestal, and they are very resistant to seeing you as who you become. I knew I would, in one way or another, disappoint anyone who once saw fit to elevate me, so I thought it would be good to bypass all of that and just be myself, the best and the worst of me, on solid ground. People put me on a pedestal anyway, and inevitably I have disappointed a great many of those folks, and of course I have disappointed myself. Nemesis was the ancient Greek goddess of retribution. She punished evil deeds, undeserved good fortune, and hubris. Disgusted by his arrogance, Nemesis brought Narcissus to his unfortunate end, punishing him for his vanity by luring him to the water where he fell in love with his own reflection and died because he simply could not look away. Oh, if that could happen to so many of our enemies. The story of Nemesis is compelling because she was inescapable. Her brand of justice was uncompromising. I, however, am not the goddess of retribution. I'm just a writer and a woman. I am too sensitive. I have thin skin. I love having the last word. I am a control freak. I cannot let things go. I take criticism personally. And being on social media offers ample opportunity for me to reveal the worst and softest parts of myself. The nature of being a writer is that I must contend with criticism. When it is constructive, I do eventually try and absorb the criticism and improve my craft. When criticism is less than constructive, I get defensive, I feel attacked. I start to doubt everything I have ever written and everything I will ever write in the future. Social media has done a great many things for writers. It has allowed us to promote our work and that of writers that we enjoy or admire. It has allowed us to interact with readers and fans, but it has also exposed us to people with bad intentions, people who take issue with what we write, how we write, who we are. And there is something about these people who want to tell you that they hate you or that you are mediocre or terrible that cuts very deep. You can read 100 compliments, but what stays with you is that one person named Johnny759 confirming your worst fears about yourself. And like many, I harbor a great many fears about myself. I have 10 nemeses. People who have slighted me in ways both real and imagined, who are now mortal adversaries I must defeat. They are nemeses because a loved one has a crush on them and goes on and on about it just to get under my skin, or because they have a career trajectory I envy, or they are vigorously mediocre, or they have wronged someone I care about, or they have wronged me. For example, the nemesis of my assistant is my nemesis too. One of my nemeses is CrossFit, which feels fairly self-explanatory. Another nemesis is Rachel Maddow, because my wife just loves Maddow. She thinks that Maddow is cute. And at night, I sit in bed with my arms crossed over my chest as she pays keen attention to Maddow's endless deconstruction of whatever the Trump administration is up to on any given day. And there I am, stewing, plotting to get Maddow off the air. There is also my primary nemesis, the person toward whom I direct most of my nemesis-related energy. I cannot disclose the provenance of my disdain, but she smiles too much. She is thriving professionally and exists to spite me. It is almost too much to bear. There are many famous nemeses, both real and imagined. Batman and the Joker, Superman and Lex Luthor, Professor X and Magneto, Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton, Eve and Villanelle. The most important thing to remember is that the rivalry must be tended to. It must be nurtured. It is an eternal flame, the heat of which can warm you during the darkest of times. An enemy is a nuisance, but a nemesis is someone for whom you harbor an abiding but relentless dislike. A nemesis must be a worthy adversary. It is far too easy for someone completely odious to be a nemesis. For example, people will often ask me if the president is my nemesis, but that would be so beneath me. Envy is certainly part of having a nemesis, but it is not quite jealousy, because generally you and your nemesis are equals in some way, even if you are the only person who believes that to be true. A nemesis can give you purpose, can hone your ambition. What I am saying is that having a nemesis is motivational. I keep track of my nemesis with an app. I'm such a freak. That's what it is. I check in on them on various social media platforms to further stoke my petty feelings. These people largely have no idea I exist. I would never actually do anything to them, but it brings me pleasure to nurture this enmity. I often discuss my nemesis on social media and have been doing so since 2011. Back then, I was tweeting about my Scrabble nemesis, a man I beat during a Scrabble tournament who did not take the loss well. He stormed off, which is just poor sportsmanship. And in the wake of his fury, my first nemesis rose from the ashes of his defeat. At the following tournament, because yes, I am a professional Scrabble player and I am nationally ranked, I began to tweet about our interactions and a vocation was born. In the ensuing years, I have peppered my online conversation with musings about one or more of my nemeses, mostly because it's a fun way to relax. But I'm also deadly serious. On May 18th, 2018, I remarked that my nemesis is having a good year professionally and has clear skin. It's a lot to take. In November of that same year, I said, just checked in on my nemesis. She is still trash. Just so I could assure any interested parties that the fire of my dislike continued to burn bright. On January 12th, 2019, I was really feeling some kind of way, noting that my nemesis is busy being beautiful and successful. That's okay. I am busy plotting and implementing her downfall. It is a multi-year plan, but I am putting in the time. I'm fine. Sometimes I put a harmless but effective curse on my nemesis, like, I hope the sun is very bright and she can't find her sunglasses. I experience a frisson of excitement when I add a new nemesis to the rotation. I also believe that the nemesis of my friend is my enemy, so anytime a friend shares news of a new nemesis, I add them to the list. Much to my surprise, many of my online followers have become invested in the saga of my nemesis. My agent has emailed me asking me to reveal the identity of my primary nemesis. Interviewers will ask if I will reveal the identities of these people. Journalists have written articles about this absurd little pastime of mine. It just isn't that deep. One publication referred to me as the Queen of Nemesis Twitter, which was a lot, but it was a very different time given what Twitter has become. The argument could certainly be made that there is nothing healthy or productive about having nemesis. People have told me that it's silly, petty, and unnecessary, but lots of hobbies could be termed as such. Oftentimes, when I discuss my nemesis online, people ask me why I'm dwelling on negativity, but it does not feel negative to have nemesis. It's quietly thrilling. It makes my life feel a little bigger than it is. It makes me feel like I have a little more control than I do. And it is a form of release. No one is harmed by petty social media posts or inconsiderate things about my anonymous nemesis. This nurturing of nemesis is not something that dominates any part of my life. I have met at least one of my nemesis, and I was perfectly pleasant during the conversation. There is photographic evidence. As someone who has been on the internet since 1992, I believe what happens online is as real as the things that happen in the physical world. The friendships I have developed with people I met online are real. The amity we share is real. Though I never have used any of the dating apps or websites, I have met several romantic partners via the internet. When I argue with someone online, I'm actually frustrated or irritated or angry. Those feelings, bless you, don't magically dissipate when I step away from the computer or look away from my phone, though they are put in proper perspective when I'm offline. Young writers ask me if they need to be on social media to have a successful career, and the answer is of course not. But that social media, when used well, can be greatly beneficial to a career. But there is a price to pay for that beneficence. The further you are from being a heterosexual, white, middle-class, able-bodied man, the higher the price you pay. You have to decide if you are willing to pay that price and if you are able to pay that price. When I first started using social media, I was in graduate school in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. I was living in a town of about 4,000 people. I was studying rhetoric and technical communication and teaching for the first time and adjusting to going from the middle of the country to the edge of nowhere. I wanted to feel connected to the world in some small way. I wanted to talk to other writers. I wanted to feel like part of something without actually having to be physically a part of something. I could be shy and awkward, but no one would ever know because I had a facility with language and the distance or perhaps anonymity of keyboard and screen. I could hide in plain sight, which is something I've been doing since I first started using the internet. Back in the early 90s, most of us who were online were pretending in some form or fashion. We were fabulists. This was before people freely exchanged pictures and the whole truth of themselves. We were just names and words. Most of the time we were talking dirty to one another. We were pretending to be more attractive and more interesting and more adventurous than we really were. I don't know that any of us knew what the internet would become, how it would become such a fundamental part of a privileged life. And because we didn't know what it would become, we spent every day online like it might be our only day online. We developed passionate connections with strangers from all around the world. We shared highly curated versions of ourselves, but not in the Instagram sense. Some people grew out of that way of being online, started being more honest, more authentic. The artifice fell away. We began using our real pictures, our real names. But some people never grew out of that way of being online. The internet was a virtual playground where they could be anyone they wanted, say anything they wanted without consequence. A lot of the tensions that arise from online interactions exist because people with different ethics around how to be online are forced to share all of these virtual spaces, even though we don't all play by the same rules. I understand that way of being online, where you can say terrible things to strangers, racist, sexist, homophobic things that you wouldn't dare say to someone's face. I understand the rush these people must feel when they revel in cruelty, in embracing the taboo and unacceptable. It makes me consider how I would behave if there were no consequences for my actions. I won't pretend I would be perfect, but I do know I wouldn't be mindlessly cruel. I am too sensitive online, and sometimes even when people approach me innocuously, I overreact. I attack before I'm attacked. And then I feel terrible because that's not who I am, not really. Sometimes I apologize for my behavior, sometimes I don't. And when I don't, I tell myself it's fine. I tell myself that given all of the harassment I tolerate, of course I'm defensive. And then a troll says something cruel and I feel justified in being too sensitive and too soft and overly prickly. It's a vicious cycle. Trolls are generally banal. I engage with trolls the way a predator toys with its prey. They tell me things I already know, or they unwittingly reveal that they hate what they hate most in themselves. A common entreaty of theirs is that I'm fat, which is not new information. I wrote a whole book about it. They tell me I'm ugly or I'm unhealthy or that I'm going to die alone, and none of these things are true. They call me a snowflake or a libtard. They simply write #MAGA. They spew racial epithets. They call me a dyke, which, okay. They make fun of my last name, which is so hilariously immature and dull. Children have been making fun of my last name since around 1982. They search through my old tweets, some of which certainly are lousy, but nothing criminal. And then they offer them up as evidence of what I'm not entirely sure. Then they try to get me to debate them. as if I'm on social media simply to sit around talking with lonely men about the news of the day. I deserve a better class of interlocutor. It's just all so absurd. I recognize this, but still, sometimes I cannot resist engaging. And then followers will say, don't feed the trolls, or they will say, bot. And that is even more grating because I've been online for 35 years. I'm clear on who or what I'm dealing with. I'm clear on the why of it. I often liken trolls, and the lesser of my critics, I call it clapping back, and I consider it like t-ball. That tempered version of youth baseball where children swing their bats at a ball nestled gently on a stand instead of having to try and hit a pitch. It doesn't require much aim or coordination, but it teaches children the fundamentals of baseball. The trolls, with all their absurd banality, are the ball. They're waiting for me. They are an easy target, low-hanging fruit, and I am a child with a very big bat and very good aim. The trolls often make it even easier because they cannot spell or use punctuation. They tend to be wrong, and loudly so. I can simply point out their weaknesses or say something clever, or I can say something mean, generally attacking their intelligence, masculinity, or dim prospects. I enjoy throwing in phrases like your mom's Cheeto-crusted basement, or using some of my favorite vocabulary words in an especially cutting manner. If someone steps to me disrespectfully, I want to serve that disrespect right back. If they get out of pocket, I'm going to join them right there. It is cathartic, just like talking about my nemesis, but with a little bit more immediacy. I know how futile it is. I know that these people who argue with me don't care about how beautifully I respond. I know I'm probably giving them what they want, attention, and the confirmation that they've drawn blood. I know they aren't going to recognize how poorly they're behaving. They aren't going to apologize. No good comes from tangling with trolls. The truth is, sometimes it just feels good to be mean in this neatly contained way. It feels good to stand up for myself because that largely only happens in online spaces where I have the time and the space to think clearly and say exactly what I want to say, when I want to say it, and how. It feels necessary to highlight the intensity, constancy, and breadth of harassment that Black queer women deal with online. It feels good and righteous to be supported and seen, to be applauded for giving as good as I get. Like most people, I was bullied as a child. I was a loner and quiet and shy. I wore bifocals and even braces. I had wild hair I could not tame. We moved around a lot, so it was difficult to find my people or my place in the world. I was a very easy target. There was nothing particularly tragic or traumatic about this, or I suppose I ran into a far more brutal kind of trouble, and then the bullying became more of a nuisance than anything else. Once, in junior high, I was reading a book on the school bus. I always had my head in a book, and some of my classmates took my book, and they began throwing it from one edge of the bus to the other, laughing as I jumped up trying to catch the book along the arc of its frenetic trajectory. What I remember about that day was how desperate I was to get my book back so I could lose myself once more in the world of the story. I remember how desperate I was for anyone on that bus to take my side. I wondered if my life would always be like that, me yearning and grasping and helpless. When I'm clapping back at trolls, it's like I'm grabbing that book and returning to the haven and the privacy of my words. A better person would have thicker skin. She would be able to ignore the taunting and petty torments of trolls. She would not have nemesis. She would turn the other cheek. She would rise above. But I'm not that better person. I am acting in the spirit of nemesis, exacting the smallest, most inconsequential of retributions. I know I'm indulging my worst impulses. I know I could be better. I choose not to be. The distinction between my trolls and I is that I know I'm no different than them. Thank you.